Hi, everybody. This is the Nephew SIG automation meeting for July 26th. And let me pull up the agenda. Share.
I'll copy and paste things around maybe. Sorry about that. I was confused.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just already started an agenda because with my my thoughts around this. Okay, so yeah, we have a lot of things here. I don't know how we're going to manage this not lasting 7 hours. Okay. So we have my list, Wim's list, Tal's list. Before we jump into this, I guess one, I wanted to say we are going to do like a 1.0.1 release before the press release. So I'm hoping to do a 1.0.1 1 this week. And if all that works well, then we would tag it next week, I guess, for the 1.0.1. But the idea being that it fixes a bunch of little things that otherwise we're going to get a bunch of questions if people try and use it because things don't work or they work intermittently, and we fixed a number of those things. So I'll just put that here. So how do we want to jump into this? There's a ton of items here.
So I have a suggestion maybe. I think we can categorize a lot of these points into two. There's technical debt, things that we want to improve on that we did from R1. Yes. And there's a bunch of stuff that are completely new things that we haven't addressed before for R2. And yeah, maybe that's one way to sift through this. We know we're going to have to do both, but we don't have too much time, right?
Yeah, my view, Tal, is this, right? I mean, the thing that our future should come from SIG 1 somehow. At least that was my view on this, because they are defining the next phase for Nephew. And that doesn't mean that this is not relevant at all, right? So it's very relevant. But my idea, or when we discussed last week, was let's focus on the things that we did for R1 and see where there are, let's say, issues that we could address, right? And let's list those or discuss these and see whether some of these would be in scope for R2 or not. Or
I agree entirely. And I posted it originally in general and not in SIG automation because I do think it's, and we did discuss this a bit in the SIG number 1
yes.
a group. So this is less about, we can put my post on the side. It's more about evaluating it in this context, like, can we do these things? Rather than proposing it, should we do these things? Because you're right, it's SIG number 1 that will drive what we should be doing. It's up to us to say what is possible in terms of execution, right?
Agree.
So Tal, regarding that, do we have like a specific date for ending the next release, like to know how much time we have exactly?
I think
as far as I know, the TSC wants it to be November. Again, we saw with R1 that it was somewhat flexible. We did delay it by a month. Yeah.
We're not going to do much if it's November. I mean, realistically, right? Like we have vacations in Europe in August, if not already. I'll be around all of August, but September we have the on-site. We're going to be prepping for that. I mean, what that leaves like October, and like if you back up and want to do a test, it's like a couple of sprints. Like I just like beyond addressing some minor tech debt, if it's November, it's going to be a small release, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that personally.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to have smaller releases. And at least the suggestions that I put, I think at some point, John, you said that these look like big things. I think all of them are actually very simple. Most are trivial. I don't know, but
Well, it's more than
we're not going to set the priorities here. Again, I think Wim is right. We shouldn't be setting priorities
Okay.
in this SIG.
So let's do this then. Let's just quickly go through and the things that are not just tech debt. Let's highlight the things that are tech debt in my list and Wim's list, and I think none of yours are tech debt, right? Tal, they seem more
Correct.
yeah, strategic. Okay.
Hey, John.
So yeah.
Before we jump in, is there a reason why SIG 1 is asking for a November release or planning for? Or is
I
that
think
just kind of,
it's TSC is what Colin's saying. I haven't really,
TSC.
I don't know. I haven't, does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I thought I heard the TSA say sometime in Jan. That is what I thought I
I thought
heard
it was
last.
January too, and then I heard November later. So yeah.
I think that we'll have to see, right? That the idea of a cycle was 6 months, but we've delayed our 1, so maybe we should delay our 2 as well. Or I don't know if the TSC wants to not push the delay forward. So the idea was that in December nothing's going to happen. So I think that was why November was decided upon. But John, you expressed the sentiment that it's okay to have quick releases. If we have a workflow now that's okay, whatever fits into R2 fits into R2, and whatever doesn't spills over to R3. So
Yeah, I kind of like personally, like if we said every, the end of May and the end of November or whatever it is, like if we just pick 2 dates and said every year that's what we're doing, and what's on the train is on the train, and what misses the train. I'm fine with that personally, and we delayed R1, but it's the first release. It's got a little, there was no train yet, so okay.
I think
that again,
personally, I think May and November as a target is not bad, right? Because it actually is at least my personal opinion, it's not a bad target, because if you do January, you're like in the Christmas period, and so it's a bad date typically to deliver something.
Yeah,
or at least that's my perspective.
Yeah, May and November sounds like good choice to me. And so if we
No,
make a
that makes
small one for
sense.
this November, yeah.
Oh, sorry. That makes sense. I just was curious why November versus, December, January, February, whatever. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so does that sound reasonable? We'll go through these and we'll decide if something is bigger or we can consider it tech debt. I would say this is like more of a night, like I can explain what each of these are on mine. I mean, my list is really long. Maybe we can go to, I don't know.
There is some overlap, I think, John. So there's a few that are overlapping, I think.
Okay.
Like changing config sync, for example, that issue, I think you have as well. I mean, it's the same for me. I mean, that was something we never did. You suggest, I think you or Tal suggested that, but then like the config sync, my first item, you have as well. I think it's a duplicate. Yeah, it's
so invariant. This is kind of related to this. So the idea is right now we made a simplifying assumption just to make our lives a little easier, that every repo goes to exactly 1 cluster. I think that's fine for now for R2 personally, but if you think about very high scale, that's not reasonable. So we need a solution for that. Personally, I think this can be deferred. But let's see, how are we evaluating? We're just evaluating whether they're tech debt or not.
Well, let's go through them maybe, and then we can always decide after whether or not I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
operating on groups of upstream packages, I think, is a nice to have. Personally, that's like
maybe you can-
basically instead of there being one upstream, you could have a set of packages as upstreams and do them all the same mutations to all of them. But it's nice to have. This one I think is important. I would consider this tech debt, and the reason is that right now delete basically doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's because of this. And this also sets us up. That also sets us up. If you read the thing, I believe it sets us up for more easily integrating with something like Argo in place of config sync. Yeah, Vish.
So I see Porch and KPT as being a dependency, our dependency on the Nephew project. That is my assumption. I could be wrong, right? And Porch and KPT are being managed separately, correct? At this point of time, which at some point of time is going to CNCF.
Yes.
And when I look at these things like package variant set, config sig and all, I see them as dependencies, which means, hey, it needs to actually have a certain feature complete and some acceptance tests that pass before we actually absorb inside of Nephew. Again, this is my line of thinking. Is that how you guys think too? Because some of this can have an impact on how some of our features actually will get delivered.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Yes, I agree 100%. As we're transitioning to CNCF, we're also discussing, like right now, Kept and Porch are very closely tied, but they don't actually have to be. Porch can be, right now the Porch command line is built into Kept, but it doesn't have to be. It's really almost completely separate. So we're probably going to spin those out into different repos. It'd still be part of the same CNCF project, but into different repos. There are a set of E tests that we have within Porch, but I think we as Nephew have a lot of influence into what we do at Porch because we're really the primary or biggest user right now. We've had some other users, we have some other use cases we're working to develop, but this is where it's made the most sense, is with this particular project. So, we can do a lot on how Porch works.
Correct. So
KPT has been around a lot longer and has a little more user. It's harder to change that because there's a bunch of users depending on it in a way that they're not yet on Porch.
Yeah. The ultimate point I was going to go with this was, hey, we need to call out that this is a dependency and that we need to be tracking our dependency closely, which will impact our Nephew releases, is where I was going off and trying to make a statement. Again, I could be wrong, but that is what I observed at least.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree.
And which means, at least one of the ideas we used to do in the past was when we had dependencies like this coming in, right? We would plan for working with Porch team. Of course, you're also the Porch team too. So
yeah.
The idea is to say, hey, when do you guys think you're going to be like, a sort of like a feature complete and stability achieved so that we can latch onto that kind of a date to work on us. And that is probably what we need to
step further, Vish, and say,
oh,
we should say to Porch team when we need it to be stable and feature, what set of features we need it to have by when. Like we should essentially think of Nephew as a customer of Porch, and the customer, as a customer, we need to provide our requirements around those types of things.
Yeah. So it's almost as if we probably want our end-to-end tests, actually working with the Porch at the CI/CD to make sure that we don't find those issues in ours, but it is found out early in Porch. Something to think about.
Yeah, we could do something like that where that's a good idea. We could run our end-to-end tests on maybe on a periodic.
Weekly or
Yeah, exactly. Build of Porch. That would be that's a great idea. That would be really good. So we catch anything early. Because right now it's sort of been like, I build it and then I go and try it to make sure it didn't break something.
Right? Because what we are trying to do somebody can go off and decide like, oh yeah, underneath, I think the engine is Porch and KPT. instead of using Nephew, let me try to go off and do this. But Purge, config sync, and KPT is the main thing that this is dependent on for some of the features so far, because we are building a solution on top of this, right? That is the way I see it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So okay. So thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So this is
Sorry,
not. This
John.
is a, yeah.
Sorry. Really quick question. A while back, Porsche wasn't running on ARM architecture, remember? Has that changed?
I
That
don't
works
know.
Antu, sorry, Antu, I think this works. I mean, I'm running it on ARM.
Oh, okay. I'll try it again then. This was back in November. Thank you.
Yeah, it works for sure. I mean, actually, it's running right now. So
Cool. Good.
Thanks.
Okay. This I would consider. So I'm going to try to separate these.
maybe
This I would
put the thing behind. Maybe John is nice to have if so, or maybe that we say, or you believe it. This is a priority or something like that. Right?
Yeah, I'm going to say.
Attack
this
depth
more of a feature.
is the thing that okay. Yeah.
Okay. Nice to have. I would consider. I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. I think we can live with it for another release.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we don't have to decide right now. I think. Yeah.
This is a feature, but it keeps coming up a lot. It's a very obvious gap. And it also is something I think that it's more a capability. It's not a thing that SIG1 would care about directly. It's more like, oh, I wanted to do, we needed to do this. So I'm going to say feature, but priority. I don't know. This I would consider tech debt. This is like taking our lessons, taking our lessons from R1 and seeing if we can make things better based on it. This is, I would say, is a feature but priority. Do people want me to explain what these are? I can briefly do it, or maybe it's too much detail to go into here.
If there's a use case, I understand use case better. So
yeah, so these are more like the use case is more from a functional point of view, but then there's like, how do we implement that use case? These are kind of those lower level capabilities. So like dependency management, right? It's I need to install this package, but this package needs a namespace and the namespace doesn't exist. How do I make that happen? Or I need to install this package, but the CRD doesn't exist for the CRs that are in the package. How do I make that happen? So that's the dependency management. And you can see we had something like this with SMF and AMF, or SMF and UPF, which we worked around. We figured out how to do it, but it potentially could be done via dependency management. I'm not even sure if that one would be resolved by dependency management.
Now, dependency management, I think you will have multiple flavors of potentially depending on where you look at. I think what we should try to do is make it as generic as possible, so that we can that it's data driven somehow, right? So that we don't have to change behind. I mean, that's I think from how I look at this, at that part, that we what is behind there, that we should try to do that.
Trying to make it, like you said, driven by the contents of the package and the contents of the repositories, as opposed to driven by some hard-coded logic. These last two bullets I highlighted, those are really about making our platform easier to work with and sort of function better. Vendor onboarding, I think this is definitely not tech debt. This is a big topic of discussion.
That will probably, that's probably coming from SIG1, I guess, right? So what we could do though, John, what we could do though, I think maybe that's something we have to do, and that's probably not release depending, is describing how, actually I'm going through it right now. So what you could do in R1 on how to achieve that, but just documentation. So that's already,
Yeah.
I think that would be the first step probably. And maybe we can write it down. Actually, in the working group 4 discussion that we had on Tuesday, I'm going to build a PowerPoint for Tuesday that or my thoughts around that, and then we can discuss it. So maybe let's first document, and then we can then agree or see that there is other approaches, and then try to make that complete. And then maybe once we have that, we can do maybe a reference implementation or of some sort to show some of it, depending on that. Would that work?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. There you're talking about the onboarding pieces specifically, or just
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going through the thing on how it could be done, right? And I'm internally onboarding one of the Nokia stuff with it.
okay, to see how. Yeah, that's exactly what we needed, to try it with a bunch of things and see how bad it is, see how painful it is.
Yeah, and then I mean, I'm going to make it work with what we have, right? And then
Right.
The thing is that then we can discuss what could be improved, right? So
Yeah.
and that would then be in scope or not in scope of whatever release the improvement, right? So that I think at least with what we have done right now, you can do something. It's not that it's impossible to do. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Let's document what that means, and then okay, then people will have opinions about that, and then we can see what we have to do to improve it. Right?
That sounds awesome. Yeah. Sandeep.
Yeah, just on that line, I have shared one small demo of the work which we have done, which is related to vendor onboarding, like a Helm to operator converter. So we have created one small tool for that, and I have posted a demo on our Slack channel. So I can. So I request everyone to just go through the demo and let us know how it is, because we feel that is we're able to convert all the Helm charts into the operator Go code, and we can just plug in little bit of I mean, we can just call that method from our sync method, is it, from the operator, and that should deploy all those things. So we have tried with the free 5GC Helm charts, and it is converted all those Helm charts into Go code, which is being called by the as operator, right? So please go. I just request everyone to just see that demo and let me know how it is, and then.
Can you, that's awesome. Can you I know you put it in the Slack channel, but can you put it in the agenda, which is a little more, the Slack stuff does roll over after a while.
All right. So
just maybe, do you, I mean, I don't know, maybe you could just put it at the top here.
okay, I'll do
Yeah.
that. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
That's cool. Awesome. I'd love to see that. Policy stuff. So in general, I would say that's a SIG1 discussion. There are existing like gatekeeper kept functions, which we could demonstrate if we wanted to. But I don't know. Then these are the features that we talked about in the call the other day. So I would consider these SIG1 for now. We have another hand. Oh, Sandeep, your hand's still up. That's stale? And then Subhash.
Yeah.
Subhash.
Audible?
You're very quiet.
Is it okay now?
Much better.
Okay, so I have prepared one document also, so that I have shared with the SIG1 and also in the policy channel. So I'll just invite everyone to check the document and see if we can add something there, and also we can define use case in a detail for the R2 so that we can present to the SIG1. Okay.
Okay, yeah, can you, oh yeah, link that one from the agenda too. Yeah, if you can add a link to that here somewhere too, then people will be sure to be able to find it.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, awesome. Okay, so these are things I think I would consider these more sort of feature, sort of tech debt. Like for R2, like being able to get rid of those hacky scripts that we have would be really great, and being able to, and that would be in the kind case, but being able to also provision some other kind of clusters would be nice to demonstrate. And that should be possible. This should be possible today, right? With CAPI, it's just a matter of we wouldn't get the intercluster networking, but we don't
Actually,
get
I'm
that today.
working on that. Huh? I'm working on that person. So
Okay,
I'm
awesome,
almost
awesome.
by the way. But yeah, we'll have to see whether this is in scope or not. But I'm actually working on it. I actually have it working, but I want to make it generic. I found that the code is too specific at the moment, so that's why I picked you, John. So I wanted to make it generic, that we use these generic constructs rather than specific code to be able to handle that.
Okay.
Because then otherwise you have like the specific. So I'm trying to see which pieces we could generalize rather than which then is reusable for other pieces.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that should go. I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll bold the things that I would like. It seemed to me like it could be, especially if we're talking about November release. It seemed potentially possible. But this is my opinion. I think we could probably do this. I don't want to do that. I would want to do that.
Because also the kind, there is another dependency we have with Gitia, right? So, which I also listed. So
Okay.
it might be words, because we kind of, we made the decision just to go for them. But I think it's fairly, I mean, if we have a bit of a discussion on the approach, it's fairly easy to potentially come with an approach that would allow us to plug in multiple of these things. And maybe we don't have to add all of them, right? But at least that we can show that the framework allows to make it extensible. Right? So that's what I also
That's
listed.
this one here you're talking about.
Yeah, so what I see behind this one for me is basically, and maybe we don't have to implement all of them, but at the moment we have a hard coding, which is not good. And so we at least have to make it more pluggable.
So this is more like a tech that type of thing.
Yeah, so that's why I listed it, is to make it a bit more pluggable, such that maybe we can just do one more just to show it, and then and there is various ways. For example, in Git, I think it's a fairly stable API, right?
Yeah.
So you could actually, do a different approach than, for example, for clusters. Clusters have, each of them have their own APIs.
So
right?
many options. Yeah.
I completely disjoint and stuff like that. So I see different approaches, and maybe that's also not a bad thing as a industry to show those two approaches.
Yeah, and to be able to talk about, hey, because this is a fairly this is effectively cloud service of Git or whatever, external service is fairly stable and simple. We can do it this way. This other one is very complex.
If you look to the API, I mean, let's say how Git works in, although the implementation underneath is different, but the way the API is exposed is already abstracted somehow.
Yeah.
And so as a result, or at least that's my opinion, the way you do to make it pluggable is different in my view than when you are talking to something where the API is very disjoint.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. When does abstraction apply and when doesn't it?
Yeah,
Effectively?
correct. Yeah, yeah.
When-
And
when-
the
when does-
abstraction is might already be there basically. So depending on
Exactly.
that, yeah. So that's
Okay.
how I looked at it. So it's I could be an interesting discussion to see what the approach could be and how we do it. Or at least that was my how or what I meant behind that topic.
Okay, that makes sense. On the UI side, so one thing I thought would be useful would be to be able to see the clusters and the contents of the clusters within the UI instead of having to drop down to cube control to actually observe the contents of the clusters. Backstage, which is our framework, has that's probably the first thing that was ever implemented in it. So in theory, we should be able to integrate that. I spent about I don't know, half a day for 3-4 hours on it, and was like, okay, this is not as easy as it should be. So I kind of like, just because I don't know any of that tool chain, so like I would do things and they wouldn't have any effect, and because I don't understand the tool chain. So I'm hoping if somebody's interested in that tool chain, they might be able to jump in and add the Kubernetes plugin. There's the Kubernetes plugin, and then there's the cluster discovery. So the Backstage plugin needs to be able to find and talk to different clusters. So as we add clusters, we need a way for it to discover those new clusters. But I would just start with Kubernetes plugin looking at the management cluster, and you still have to drop to kube control for workload clusters. Then we could layer in cluster discovery. I think that should be something doable. So it's something I would like to see if we can do it. This is a really small thing, but it does get back to how we, okay, so yeah, Victor's bringing up upgrades. Oh. We have to decide if we're going to support upgrades right now.
And the other,
this is
the other,
really small.
the other, yeah, there is another thing is like changing the parameters of these three. For me, the beauty, if I look to cloud native automation, it's like we have this declarative approach. Let's say you change the package,
Yeah.
and let's see what happens. Let's say instead of, the problem is it's very hard to test, I think, in our current setup because we need these networks to communicate. But let's say you change the configuration a little bit slightly, and then it should automatically figure itself out, reconcile.
So like more declarative
changes.
approach.
Changes.
Yeah. Yes, that would be nice. Yeah.
We have a
This,
little
I
bit
think,
of not,
I would say this is more of a SIG1 thing, whether they want to go here or not in R1.
Yeah, they have
That's my
topic-
list. Those are the things I see as sort of like things that could be addressed in a small release that are primarily around smoothing over warts in the existing thing, but maybe a little bit beyond that. I think this is the same one.
Yeah, so that's a
that we had.
duplicate, so you can remove it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just leave it. I'll bold it here too.
Yeah. So the second one is, yeah, a lot of our parameters are hard coded, I think. So now we could do something very basic, right? To say, to have this generic, or maybe a free 5GC specific, and that could be, by the way, that might be an interesting way, because if you have vendor specific parameters, right? So that could be a way, is that rather than hard coding it, is that we get it somewhere from the package. They can still be hard coded, but at least we can, for every environment, we could change them, because it would be changing the content of that in the package. And we don't have to do anything in specialization. So we just pull it through, right? And then it gets through. So that's what I meant with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be nice to. So this gets into swim lane 3, right? And
yes, and yeah, a little bit maybe yes, but because swim lane 3 for me, I see really as a okay. So
You see it more
it's
as runtime.
That's
as
is
opposed
the pet versus kettle discussion, right? Is it immutable or not? So I see this still as you'd still have an initial config file that you parse, right? And you deploy it. So as a result, a swim lane tree for me is really you treat it really like a pet, right? Where you have a live network function and you change parameters. This is not yet.
you add a slice or something, right? Like
Yes,
which is
that's swim lane 3 full blown, right? But here it's still today, like MC said, there's a bunch of parameters that we use in our setup. They are hard coded. So that means if you
okay.
as Orange wants to use your own parameters, you have to basically change the code.
Okay.
You see, so it's makes it a little bit more customizable for a specific environment, but without doing the full, let's say, day 2 configuration changes in a live network function. So it's still, I think.
So what
it's
about
still,
onboarding a second? I'm sorry, I'm cutting
Sorry,
you off, but I just realized we didn't talk about onboarding a second open source. Is that something we think in R2 could be? I think that could be valuable, right? We talked about that, I think, yesterday in one of the calls.
yeah, sure. Yeah. And I didn't list that, but yeah, because
I didn't listen either, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we can definitely do that. Yeah. Because it shows it's a proof for the chain or the things that we have, right? To see how to make it work. Yeah, Antu has her hand raised.
Oh, does somebody have a hand raised? I'm sorry. For some reason I'm just seeing, there we go. Okay. Yeah, and two.
Does this mean that we're getting into like a 2-tier configuration file, one that is generic and then one below that extended for a specific vendor? Is that where you guys thinking?
So in the UPF like deployment, say, or SMF deployment, those things are all generally generic, but I believe there's like a references or a config references or something that could point to vendor specific resources.
Yeah.
And yes, that's exactly, yeah, because vendors need like to get Wim to show up and to get Ericsson to show up, to get all these folks, Samsung, like we need people to be able to sell their special sauce, right? I mean, they have to be able to compete.
That makes
And
sense.
so they need it, yeah.
The second question.
What I'm doing right now, Antu, is that I built, just to give you a sense of what I'm doing, is in the package in the top right with the free 5GC right now, I put in, let's call it a vendor specific CR, right? That has a bunch of parameters that specialization that nobody knows about, right? It's just cut through all the way to the operator that goes in the workload cluster, and then okay, I built a specific work operator that understands that and does something with it, right? So that's kind of what I'm doing. If you see what I'm
Is that the proposed approach? Because that seemed like
wait, so that is an approach that could work for in the R1 scope. I'm not saying this is the approach, but that is a approach that could work.
Yeah, I don't have a preference or deep enough understanding, so I'm just trying to find out what the vendors are doing. What are the preferred approaches, and then learn from there.
This is a prototype, by the way. This is just an example because for me that's part of the documentation that I was referring to before, showing what is possible. Because if we show what is possible with R1, the idea is to get feedback, right?
Yep.
And then based on
You
that,
make
we
it
can
better.
decide this is good, this is not good. I don't like this.
Yeah.
So that's
The second question.
Yeah.
Sorry. The second question I have on this is, when I did SMF, I relied heavily on Stephen's understanding, right, of the config parameters, which one we could hard code, which one we can use right now, right? So if we're expanding the config parameters for the NFs, we need, at least for me, I need somebody to kind of tell me, right?
No, so
Like,
what I'm proposing here is not to change it, but rather than you having, you had a hard-coded config map. I don't know the exact implementation, but you have somewhere a hard-coded config map. The idea is that you get it from the top rather than having a
no, I agree, but I don't know the values or how to unhard code it correctly.
Yeah, but I'll give it in the same format as you have it right now. So I'm not going to
Oh,
change
okay,
it.
okay. So instead of hardcode, you just read it.
Yeah, so I give it in the same format. So that means if it's a string or a slice or a map, depending on how the config map behaves, you will get it in the same form.
Cool.
But we're not doing it on like a vendor specific stuff, right?
Correct.
So
So
this is more like
I'm not
this is
going to
like
do
3GPP, for example. Is
Yeah.
3GPP?
This is very it's still very hard coded, but it's at least customizable. So for example, if I am Orange and I want to say my MNC MCC is blah blah blah, right, instead of the hard coded one that we have right now, or they have a slice
Got
ID
it.
or area which is a little bit different.
That actually was what we agree on when you were in our office. It's just that we never get a chance to
we never
actually
did
build
it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm going.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, Ravi.
Yeah. So this is again going to the SIG one, the themes where there is this proposals to extend or basically have Nephew interact with the other telco automation system, the service orchestrator, and so on. So I think I'm assuming that a lot of the service specific configurations will be decided based on the intents that come from that north-south interface, right? So in the sense, I'm just trying to understand exactly, what is the deployment specific configurations that is required versus the service specific, which is the OEM based configurations. I don't know whether we have touched that aspect yet, because slicing and all is very much service specific, and based on specific deployment requirements, you might have different configuration for your parameters and so on, right? So
My idea, so Ravi, the idea is not to tackle that, right? It's just to say we need some of these parameters, right? And in R1, even we use them, right? But they are, at least they are not configurable at the moment. So my idea was, okay, let's at least make it a bit configurable. That doesn't mean that that config map or whatever we use to do that is the final way that's how we interface with the service orchestration and stuff like that, right? So the idea here is not to tackle that yet. It's just to at least provide the information in a more configurable way rather than in a hard-coded way, if you see what I mean.
yes. No, with free 5GC, I know everything is kind of mushed into one, but typical deployments, separate deployment specific kind of aspects or design or deploy or those aspects from the service specific, which is typically driven using your probably even your EMS systems or other OEM systems and so on. So the question is that how do you map that back into Nephew? Right?
That would be swim lane 3, I think, right? That you're discussing about right now. The idea here is it's still that's why I'm saying is we are using the I call it the immutable way of deploying at the moment. So you basically you deploy and you get a config map, right? The parameters are coming as a one shot, and that's what we have for R1. We don't have the ability yet to dynamically change the configuration of an existingly running. I mean, we can do certain things which are related to lifecycle, like the capacity thing that we did. But parameter change at the moment, what we have is it's an immutable system, right? So that means every change that you do, we will restart. And we get those new parameters will be used when we have restarted, which is in the paradigm of what I call the immutable deployment artifact.
Okay.
You see?
Okay. So yeah, that seems reasonable to me as a candidate. This
So
one,
the
this
point,
is
1
the
minute. Yeah. So why I raised it is that today, when we go to the pipeline, the scheduling, so when we do these conditions and stuff like that, the way once a pipeline runs, the next schedule is going to, I think it's 1 minute, or it's hard coded in Porsche, I think. I don't know whether it's 1 minute, but at least that's what I see. And I haven't looked into the code yet, but the question, but this is probably a bigger topic. This is really specific to Porsche in my view, but the question is whether we can change that, let's say, reconcile loop that sits under the
I mean, we
hood.
Yeah,
course.
but I think it's something we can look at. Like I would consider it kind of a tech debt thing, right? Like it just does that right now. But there could be, I think that part of it is right that because it's imagine there are things that it knows about, and so it might be able to fire events more quickly when it knows a change has happened. But when it's just Git doing things, it doesn't want to pull Git more frequently than that.
No. So here it's really, I think what I'm referring to is that when we go through this conditional dance, right? What you see actually, what we do, the pipeline is this, right? So we have a pipeline, and so everything that is in the pipeline locally is executed, right? And that will change some of the conditions potentially, right? And then we have a controller which has to wait then for the 1 minute. So what I'm looking at is when we change these conditions, then ports can actually see, hey, there is a change. So he could trigger already the thing that has a condition false, right? So he could actually trigger that, and then it would also improve the speed at which we go through the whole pipeline.
Yeah, every time Porch saves the package revision resources, it should fire an event for anybody watching that package revision. Yes,
that's what
totally
agree.
agree.
That's what I'm meaning here. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, that would speed things up quite a bit, probably. Yeah.
The dynamic networking, I see I think I had a proposal, but I have reworked it as part of this. The networking reworking is right now. You remember at some point, I mean, we were 2 weeks in, and we said, let's make it dynamic. So the problem that we have at the moment is that we have to set up the networking, and we have to know how many clusters we are going to get. And that's, I think, not good. It should be flexible, whatever. How many clusters you deploy, it should figure itself out.
Until you run out of ports.
Yes, of course. Yeah, but at least we should not have this hard-coded dependency, I think. Then the function SDK I'm working on. So that's the one. Those two are related somehow. So I'm reworking that piece. So the function SDK is so there's one issue. And there were 2 improvements that when we did the function SDK. One I did already during the R1. There is one that is left, which is related to, and that was because of the NAD. So we have this. What is the issue? Is this? We always do a diff on the spec, right? And I think this was towards your point. We should do this hash-based diff, John, right? So you proposed that, and then we didn't do that. But like for the NAD part, the problem is that it's a concatenated JSON string, right? If you look to the plugin of NAD, so doing a diff in such a way is really hard, right? And the problem is that so the other problem that we had with the NAD function is that there are certain parameters which you already know, but you don't know it complete. So that means that the spec that you can spit out has only certain pieces, but the spec will change with the additional parameters. So that means that your diff has to be on specific parameters. So we never fixed that. So, and what we did is basically we kind of only put a condition and didn't put the spec down when you know that you need an NAD, and that adds a lot of complications. So I think in the meantime, I know how to fix this. So this is a way to make special. So there is in the SDK itself, there is a bunch of code that this thing makes it complicated, or there is a lot of if then else statement because of this. So this
is a kind of tech debt simplification thing.
Yes, that would simplify the SDK underneath implementation to make it simpler. But it was a rather big change, so I decided not to tackle that.
Yeah, not to do it at the last minute. And
then the secret management, so that's a topic.
Sorry, N2 has her hand up.
Sorry.
Really quickly, if you take a step back, Stephen had mentioned that he has the task to do an SDK for Nephew. I forgot for which part of Nephew. And now we have the function SDK. Is there a
The
How much
function
job?
SDK Vim already built during the
Yeah.
R1 timeframe. So he's improving on that. I mean, if we're doing a more Nepio in general SDKs to bring vendors on board, particularly get them to a path of building an operator, I would imagine adding something to management cluster would be part of that. And then probably would including Vim's tools as part of the overall tools.
Yeah, it may be part of the whole suite of tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, that brings me to my question really is how many SDK are we going to have and is there a
We have a
place that
suite of tools, so we will present that as a
Okay.
suite of tools that people can
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, so
And then
this
the documentation
addresses
tells
like,
them, yeah.
This
Okay.
particular one addresses the question of building functions and in particular building controllers on the management cluster.
Yeah,
those
many
plugins.
things we should have a single suite of tools for people to use
Yeah.
based on their needs. Anything from bundling package to how to build a controller on management cluster, how to just add a cap function onto management cluster, to adding an operator, would all be probably the suite of things that are available for folks to use.
Yeah, is that we should record that or document that somewhere. These are the suite of tools that we're thinking of making available or have been made available so that a new onboarder can look at it and say, oh, okay, I know generally for different part of Nepio, there are different tools. Right? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that'll definitely be a big documentation of how to use it. In fact, before we even getting into that point, we should have a functional specifications of what that suite of tools are
Architecture
including.
functional.
Yeah, and then addressing which set of people to get on board,
Cool.
Yeah.
including
The
SIs
fun-
and maybe even telco, right? If they want to add, if they want to write something.
Anyway, for the function SDK, we have documentation, right? So that is
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Uh,
Secret management.
I'll-
Thank you.
Tal?
Oh,
Yeah, I wanted to make a suggestion maybe on how we can move forward from this. So there's obviously a lot of, a long list here. I think that's fine. I think we should just create GitHub issues for every one of them. They don't have to be
Let's do that
execution
one.
issues necessarily. They could be discussion ones. And we don't have to have, I think, any R2 anxiety about any of them. That is, we'll tackle the issues as they come in, as people have the energy and focus to do them. Whatever makes it R2 makes it, and whatever doesn't, doesn't. I think the more SIG-1 directives of what we want to kind of make the themes for the R2 release are different from this, right? Our technical debt is, we'll keep amassing more as well as we solve things. But yeah, I don't think we need to be too anxious about, what will make it in R2 or not. At least not at this point. At some point, some of the issues will work together and we'll need to coordinate. And I think as next month and the month afterwards, we'll probably start building it into sprints and then deciding what goes into what sprint, right? But yeah, I'm not anxious about any of this. Some of the things will have to be pushed to R3. There are obviously bigger issues here, but that's fine. It's ongoing work.
I totally agree. Yeah, we'll create a backlog out of this and we'll just work it and whatever makes it, makes it. But let's let Wim finish up his last one, secret management.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
yeah. Secret management is that I think we use secrets at the moment, but it's kind of all over the place. So that's I think that's probably a bigger topic in my view, right? That and I think I forgot one that what we did not test, and this is nothing. I think I'm not sure whether the operator, the FreeFiGC works, but when we did specialization, we made sure that we could do dual stack, IPv6 only, IPv4 only. So we could, this could just be test. I'm not sure whether
Yeah, I never test the FreeFiGC with v6, so that's a good question. Yeah.
So this would be, I think it's good because if you look at these days, IPv6 only networks and stuff like that is a big team sometimes, but. Yeah. And I'm not saying we have to do it, but in specialization, at least we took care that we could do all of these scenarios. So and we could test.
Yeah, absolutely.
See
I think it would be great to actually build that into our CI, right? But
yes.
That we know if we break IPv6.
Yeah.
I think the CLD has v6 fields supported in there.
Yes, yeah, I think we have. I think at least I know. We have our pipeline test for the specialization. We have explicit tests for V6 only and dual stack and stuff like that. So we have all of that in the specialization space. We haven't really tested the full, that whole hydration. So
We don't do the ping. We
Yeah,
don't
but
do.
also for 5GC, we also have to make sure that GTP 5G supports V6, the kernel module.
yes, yeah, that's why I'm saying that's why for me what's behind here. We should just try this out.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. I think that why don't we do? I think Tal's suggestion is great. We'll take these, we'll put them in as issues and backlog, and then people can pick up ones they're interested in at any time. But we'll start to schedule them into sprints and things soon. My biggest concern right now is that how long is it going to take to decide on the themes for R2? And if November's the release, those might end up being the themes for R3, I guess is my maybe the better way to state it.
Well, more realistically, 1.1 in November is probably more likely.
Yeah, whatever we call it. There's a November release, and yeah, what's going to be in it. So, okay, awesome.
By the way, that's also an important point that Tal raises. I think security is doing an audit on how secure our thing is. I think it's also, I actually thought about it, but I didn't listen, but it's also not unimportant, I think.
So Rado said that they had a team at Samsung who could do some pen testing. And I don't know if Rado's here or anybody else from Samsung knows any status on that, but that would be, I mean, I expect right now, that's not something we've really been focused on as something that's not, we're not shipping right now. So anyway, okay. Thank you, everybody. And have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.